Hello, my name is Julian Herrera, I'm Colombian, I'm 40 years old, and what I'm going to tell you here isn't a story, it's a calling. I'm not a preacher, I'm not famous, I'm not a prophet, I'm just an ordinary man with a life full of mistakes and successes, like yours. But what happened to me? It changed everything. In the early hours of the day, when I needed peace the most, God gave me a dream, and it wasn't just any dream. It was something so real, so vivid, so powerful, that I woke up crying, trembling, unable to speak. My soul knew what my body didn't yet understand. I had seen heaven, I saw the rapture, I saw the angels, I saw how they took people away, and I saw the despair of those who remained, and no matter how hard I tried to go on with my day as if nothing had happened, I couldn't, because when God shows you something like that, you can no longer remain silent. You have to warn, you have to shout, you have to share, even if it's just to reach one soul. So, if you're listening to this message right now, it's because God wants to speak to you. Stay with me until the end, because if this dream was a warning, you still have time. I woke up with my heart racing, as if I had been running for hours, but my body was still. The room was dark, but something inside me screamed that I had just seen the most real light of my life. My eyes were still burning, not from the dream, but from something deeper. I was trembling, and I wasn't cold. It was as if heaven had touched me while I slept. I can't explain it, I only know that it felt more real than anything I've ever experienced while awake. The first thing I heard inside my mind was, "You were there, and now you have to tell." The voice wasn't human, and although I didn't understand how, I knew exactly what it was about. It was ecstasy. And I had just seen what no one wants to believe they will see so soon. The most powerful image that struck me wasn't the sky opening up, it was my brother's embrace. He appeared before me as if he had never left and hugged me as if I had never made a mistake. There were no regrets or demands, just a sincere smile that made me grumble inside. I said, "Brother, I'm so happy to see you," and he responded wordlessly, just smiling, as if to say, "It's all right now." That embrace seemed to have been saved by God for the exact moment, and there, in that moment, I understood that in heaven no one carries the traumas of earth. My brother remembered nothing of what the world did to us, he simply knew that we were going home, and this home wasn't a physical place, it was something eternal, something that cannot be explained. My mother was there too. When she saw my grandmother, who had disappeared years ago, she burst into tears of joy. The woman who created us appeared with wings, young, light, with a light that didn't burn, but healed just by looking at her. She hugged my mother so tightly that it was as if all our family's pain vanished in that same second. That was heaven, not because of the golden streets, but because of every tear that finally dried. I saw people around embracing each other, recognizing each other, celebrating. There were no judgments, only reunions. It was as if heaven were a grand homecoming, and every face there reflected a longing that was finally fulfilled. An entire crowd felt overwhelmed by a feeling, the wait is over. Tears streamed down my face even in sleep, but it wasn't sadness, it was something beyond logic. I shouted, "Jesus is coming." Like someone who sees a ship after years adrift, and everyone around me felt the same. We jumped, we cried, and something in us said, "It is now. He has arrived." I had never felt such urgency and at the same time such peace. It was as if everything I had experienced up to now had only been the introduction to a much bigger story, and there was no fear. Fear remained in the world. What remained there was certainty. It was faith transformed into reality. It was everything we hear in services, in preaching, in verses, but now with smell, with color, with flesh, with soul. That was the end of all doubt. What really broke me was seeing who I thought wouldn't be the people who, in my opinion, weren't believers enough, but that they were in the arms of smiling angels. There were no church signs, no labels, only people who had been contacted. There, everything we thought we knew about merit crumbled. It was then that I understood that Jesus doesn't come for those who think they're ready. He comes for those who have been broken and have chosen to trust. Those who said, "I'm not perfect, but I surrender." That it was the most powerful scene I've ever seen because it shattered my pride. It made me see that salvation isn't about appearances, it's about surrender. I came back from this dream literally shaking. I sat up in bed, my body in shock, my breath short, my soul expanding. I tried to write it all down, but words failed me. The only thing I could say, still crying, was, "Lord, thank you for letting me see." I knew this wasn't just a dream, it was a warning, a calling, and I couldn't ignore it. That day, a new urgency was born within me. I needed to warn people, I needed to tell you that Jesus is closer than we imagine, because if that was just a glimpse, then reality will be unbearable for anyone who isn't prepared. What surprised me most about that dream wasn't the beauty of heaven, but the way the reunions happened. It wasn't just any old hello. Every person who saw each other again embraced as if they had waited centuries for that moment. It was as if time no longer existed, as if every second of longing, every tear shed here on earth was answered with a single embrace. I remember seeing mothers reunited with their children, wives seeing their husbands again, children running into their parents' arms, and that was it. There were no illnesses, no guilt, no distances. There was only love, a love without haste, a love without end. My grandmother was the first to touch me, but she wasn't the white-haired old woman I remembered. She was young, with lively eyes and firm hands. She enveloped me in a hug that needed no words. She didn't say anything to me, but I understood everything. I understood that she always prayed for me, that she always believed in my salvation, even when I was far away, lost in thoughts that led nowhere. When I looked, my mother was already crying. Between sobs of joy, she said, "She's back, Mom is back." It was as if God had saved every tear my mother shed and was now returning it all in the form of miracle. But it was when I saw my brother that something inside me exploded. I can't explain how, but I knew he'd been gone for years. Even so, there he was, smiling, completely happy. He hugged me as if nothing had happened, as if all the mistakes, all the unspoken words, and the forgiveness never asked for had vanished, and I cried like I'd never cried before. I said, "Brother, I missed you so much," and he just smiled as if to say, "None of that matters anymore." I felt a peace I'd never known before, and in that moment I understood what forgiveness truly means. It's not forgetting, it's healing, it's finding in others what God sees, not what the world has damaged. I can't get the sparkle in his eyes out of my mind. It wasn't human. It was as if eternity herself lived inside him. I looked at him and felt that, even without saying it, he reminded me of something essential. "We're going home." This phrase repeated itself inside me like a soft yet powerful echo, and suddenly everything made sense. The pain, the absence, the days of struggle, everything had a purpose. I realized that nothing had been in vain. Every trial here on earth was being transformed for a glory in heaven. That wasn't a consolation, it was a revelation, a reminder that our story doesn't end here. Around me, hundreds of people were experiencing the same thing. I saw crowds surrounded by angels. Some of these angels seemed familiar. It was as if God allowed those we love to be the first to welcome us. The atmosphere was filled with color, with sounds that don't exist in this world, with a lightness that no poet could describe. But even with all that beauty, what struck me most was the simplicity of the gesture. Hugs, hugs that healed, hugs that restored. There, the traumas of the earth evaporated with the touch. It wasn't just a pretty place, it was the home we all always seek, even without knowing it. And when I looked back, I saw familiar faces, people who, as they had prayed, cried, waited, they were there with tears in their eyes, but with the smiles of those who finally understood everything. I felt that there was no longer any religion, church sign, status, or judgment there, only hearts, hearts that had been transformed, and it was then that a truth sank into my soul. Heaven is more about reunions than rewards, more about who is with you than what you deserve, and I knew with every fiber of my being that this was real, that what I saw was a gift from God, and now I had a duty to share. Everything around me began to change. The sound of joy turned into a respectful silence, as if heaven were about to speak. It was then that I looked up, and in that sky that no longer resembled the sky on earth, I saw the impossible happen before my eyes. It was as if the atmosphere opened up, as if a veil was torn from top to bottom, revealing another dimension. And that's when I saw giant spheres of light descending calmly, as if heaven itself were drawing near to us. I couldn't see a face, I couldn't identify wings, but the glory was so intense that all I knew were angels, and each one seemed to know exactly who they were looking for. People began to look up. They pointed. They trembled. Some fell to their knees, others raised their hands as if they had finally found someone, and in the midst of it all, I couldn't contain myself. I began to shout, "Jesus is coming! Jesus is coming!" It was as if my soul had waited my whole life to be able to say that out loud. I jumped, I cried, I laughed like a child. My mother took my hand, and there, between the opening heavens and the earth watching, I understood that it wasn't just a dream, it was a warning, a gift, a calling, a helping hand. The lights descended slowly, but with authority. Each one had a presence that dominated everything. It was as if creation itself paused to contemplate the most anticipated moment in history. A volcano began to erupt in the distance, as if the earth, too, sensed that something great was approaching, and even with all that chaos around me, I felt no fear. On the contrary, it was as if the world's pain had been swallowed by a certainty. The moment is approaching. The people who were being touched by the lights burst into tears, but they were tears of joy. They knew, everyone knew, he was coming. In the background, I heard someone say, "I'm not ready." It cut me to the core, because in the midst of so much glory, there were still those who were not prepared. They looked to the sky with fear, not with hope, and that's when I realized that the difference wasn't in what we saw, but in how we reacted. Those who knew Jesus smiled. Those who only heard of him trembled, and the Spirit of God showed me something I will never forget. The rapture isn't about deserving, it's about recognizing. It recognizes that without him we would never be ready, but with him we can be lifted up, even if we are unclean, even if we have flaws, even if we are crying. I looked up at the sky and it didn't make any sense. I saw a reunion. It was as if everything Jesus promised on every page of the Bible was happening right there in front of me. Every prophecy, every verse, every tear of those who waited, everything was accomplished perfectly, and the sky smiled. Yes, the sky smiled because God loves the idea of seeing his children return home, and in that moment I felt that he doesn't want anyone to be left behind. He's not in a hurry to judge, he's in a hurry to seek him. And that's why he still gives dreams, he still speaks, still stirs our hearts while we sleep. When everything began to become even brighter, I heard something that didn't come from outside, but from within. "You have to tell them, they need to hear." That wasn't just for me, it was for my generation, it was for my family, it was for you. I understood that as long as there is time, there is still hope, and if a single video, a single voice, a single testimony can make someone kneel and say, "Jesus, prepare me," then it's worth it, because that sky, with all its brilliance, is closer than we imagine, and when it opens, there will be no time to rehearse, it will be all or nothing, and I just want you to be among those who smile, not among those who tremble. The joy in that place was something I had never seen on earth. It wasn't just about happy people, they were free people. It was a silent celebration, but with heart-wrenching cries. It seemed that each person knew deep in their heart that this was the end of pain, the end of waiting. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving only what truly mattered. I saw men and women dancing fearlessly, children running without limits, faces marked by life bathed in tears of relief. The pain vanished, the longing had been cured. There, death no longer existed, only life remained, and a life that defies human logic. I glanced to the side and saw people who had lost everything down here, now celebrating as if they had won the universe, and perhaps they have, because what is the universe compared to heaven? A man in a tattered suit embraced someone as if they were his child. A lady on her knees kissed the hands of an angel. Everyone was ecstatic, and it wasn't hysterical joy, it was pure peace that filled the body from within. I felt light, as if all guilt, all fear, all haste had been washed away. There was no clock, no debt, only redemption, and I understood, Jesus didn't promise a beautiful heaven. He promised a just heaven. As the angels continued to appear, each with a specific mission. I realized that heaven wasn't disordered, it was order, purpose, precision. Nothing was random, no soul was there by chance, and the most beautiful thing was that every person seemed expected. You looked into someone's eyes and realized they were looking for you here. It broke something inside me, because so often on earth we feel forgotten, ignored, left out, but not there. There, everyone was received like a king, like a beloved daughter, like an heir to something eternal, and the angel's gaze made this clear. You have arrived. God was waiting for you. Even with all that happening, I began to feel a strange weight in my heart, a tightness. It was as if, in the midst of so much celebration, something inside me remembered that not everyone was there. I didn't see some faces, faces I knew, faces I loved, and then I realized that even in heaven there is memory, not the kind of memory that hurts, but the kind that makes us pray for those who are still here. And at that moment, I felt a cry coming from all sides. People say, God, reach those who haven't come yet, go find those who stayed behind. Even in heaven there is intercession, because heaven is the greatest proof that love never ends. I looked to the horizon and saw a multitude approaching. New people arrive, greeted with applause, with dancing, with praises that aren't sung down here. It was like a great invisible choir singing the same melody, welcome home. And each arrival was a miracle because no one entered alone. Every soul was brought in with honor. The angels formed a kind of corridor of light, and whoever passed through was touched by a glory that cannot be explained. I tried to understand how that was possible, how so much love could fit in one place, but I realized that it wasn't heaven that was great, it was God who was greater than everything. And then a phrase came clearly to my mind. The joy of heaven is worth more than all the achievements on earth. It tore me apart inside, because, how many times do we exchange the eternal for the immediate? How many times do we exchange what God has for us for the cheap distractions the world offers? There, everything that was temporary had vanished, only the eternal remained, and in that atmosphere, I understood that death never had the last word, because when Jesus smiles, even the tomb becomes a door. And at that moment, all of heaven smiled and wanted to shout to the world, you have no idea what you're missing. I paused for a moment in the midst of that heavenly celebration and began to think about everything I experienced on earth. The mistakes I made, the decisions that led me astray, the words I never said, the excuses I invented to avoid drawing near to God when He called me. All of this flashed through my mind like a movie, but do you know what surprised me most? None of it mattered anymore. It was as if all the weight I carried had evaporated, the shame, the guilt, the self-burden all left behind in the dust of the world, and there, in the middle of heaven, I heard my own spirit say, you arrived, and you arrived the way you needed to arrive, surrendered. It was at that moment that I saw Jesus, but not like in paintings, not like in movies. I couldn't see His face clearly, but His presence was so real there was no room for doubt. He didn't look at me judging me. He didn't ask why it took me so long. He simply looked at me as if to say, I knew you would come. And there I fell to my knees, not because He commanded it, but because it was impossible to resist such mercy. Everything I thought was important, status, achievements, pride, human certainties crumbed before a single glance from Him, and a phrase passed through me like a lightning bolt of truth. You never had to be perfect. You just needed to let me in. As I wept there, I felt hands lifting me up. They were angels, but they didn't lift me forcefully, they lifted me tenderly, as if saying, you are no longer a slave. You are free. And then everything made sense. The nights I felt alone, the days when the world seemed to crush me, the moments when prayer seemed to never reach beyond the ceiling, everything was being answered in that moment. God hadn't forgotten me. He was simply preparing the right moment to show me why it all happened, and that moment had a name, eternity, an eternity where pain cannot enter, where loneliness is forbidden, where the soul finally finds rest from my past. People who hurt me, people I hurt, and yet they were there. Some hugged me, others simply smiled from afar, but none of them were harmed. It was as if heaven had erased the memory of evil, as if all the wounds had been washed away by a love so pure that not even time can erase it. That taught me more about forgiveness than any sermon. In heaven there is no room for pride, it's simply fun, and I understand that many people will be surprised by who will be because God sees hearts, not coverings, and saves with divine criteria, not human rules. Heaven is not a prize, it's a home, and I realized that even though I didn't deserve it, He let me in, not because I did everything right, but because I finally surrendered. In that environment I realized that Jesus never called us to be superheroes of faith, He called us to be children, children who fall, who make mistakes, who repent and keep trying, children who even dirty run to their Father's lap. And if I learned anything from that dream, it's that God's lap was never closed. I was the one who kept my distance, but in that moment, enveloped in glory, all I could do was repeat to myself, none of that matters anymore. He brought me home, and when I looked around, I saw others like me, people with scars, people who had experienced pain, people who once thought they would never be saved. But there they all stood, restored, redeemed, and happy as children in the Father's lap. They won not because they were perfect, but because they didn't give up. And in that moment, I realized that the gospel isn't about who falls the least, it's about who stands with Jesus, because when He takes your hand, even the past becomes a bridge. And now I knew, this was the victory that truly mattered, nothing else, just that, eternity in His eyes and the certainty that I am finally where I was always meant to be. Suddenly, everything intensified, the lights grew brighter, and the sky, once simply beautiful, now became terrifying. It was as if the world was holding its breath. An eerie silence filled the air, and then, without warning, a sound sliced through the air like an invisible trumpet. It wasn't a human sound, it was a vibration that pierced the body, the spirit, everything. A distant volcano began to erupt, the earth trembled, the sky seemed to fold like paper, making room for something that no science will ever be able to explain. It was the end of logic, it was the beginning of visible eternity. People looked up, some wept with joy, others screamed in terror. The sky filled with gigantic spheres of light that descended toward the earth with majestic slowness. They weren't stars, they weren't satellites. They were angels, angels like no one has ever seen. Each one seemed to have a specific mission. They came with authority, they didn't ask permission, they knew whom to seek, and when they touched people, they began to rise from the ground as if gravity had lost its power. It was beautiful, it was glorious, but it was also despairing for those who stood still, watching and realizing they hadn't been called. In the middle of that scene, I saw something that broke me, a group of people with cell phones in their hands trying to film the moment. Some were laughing nervously, others were shouting, "What's happening?" But none of them could move. They were frozen between astonishment and fear, and I, already trapped in that dream, could only scream, "Jesus is coming." She repeated this as if it were a call for help, a warning, a cry, but for many it was already too late, not for lack of warning, but because they spent their lives saying that they still had time. Now time was being swallowed by eternity, and silent regret was worse than any scream. All of heaven seemed to watch this with sorrow. It was as if the angels themselves wept for each soul that remained. I saw some crying, yes, crying, as if they also knew who might be there, but chose to be, and it tore me apart inside, because deep down, we all have someone who is still spiritually asleep, and what I saw there was clear. Heaven doesn't celebrate those who remain, heaven weeps, because we weren't created for damnation, we were made for glory, but there is a limit, and when this limit is broken, the time for mercy ceases. The door closes and what remains is the silence of absence. The lights came on with the chosen ones, heaven closed and the earth seemed to cry out for help. But now it was as if no one answered anymore. The people who had mocked now trembled. Those who said, "I don't believe that," fell to their knees, and I understood that the rapture is not a spectacle, it is separation. It is the moment when the world finally realizes that it was a joke, that every sermon, every service, every testimony was a call from God saying, "Come before it's too late," but pride wouldn't allow it, and now those who stayed behind could only watch. It was at that moment that I woke up drenched in sweat, sobbing uncontrollably, with a pain in my chest that wasn't fear, it was responsibility. I knew I had no more excuses. God had shown me what many will never see, and now either I spoke up or I would be denying the heaven I saw. I stared at the dark ceiling of my room and said softly, Lord, I understand, they need to know. I'll tell them, because if there's still time, even a little, it's worth shouting. Shout that he's coming, that heaven is real, and the worst noise in hell will be the silence of those who had the chance and didn't listen. From the moment I opened my eyes, the sound of the dream kept echoing in my ears, but it wasn't the sound of trumpets or praises from heaven, it was the weeping of those left behind. The screams, the terrified faces, the hands stretched high trying to hold on to something that was no longer there. I remember the desperation of a woman who cried out her son's name, of a man who said, but I went to church, and no one answered. Silence was the sentence. Those sounds tore me apart inside because deep down I knew that many people I know would be in that place, not for lack of opportunity, but for delaying the decision until that it was too late. I spent the whole day in silence trying to process everything. But you can't process heaven, you can't summarize eternity. Everything I experienced in that dream seemed more real than life itself, and the more I remember those who smiled as they were taken away, the more it hurt to think of those who weren't there. I wanted to hug them, shout to them, wake them up, but in the dream, that was no longer possible. They simply stared at the sky with eyes full of panic and souls drowning in regret. And then I understood, in the rapture there are no second chances, there is the choice made before, and only those who chose Jesus now will be with him later. The problem is that many believe they still have time, that they will decide when they feel it, but, do you know what I saw there? People who expected to feel and now only felt empty, people who knew everything about the Bible, but never opened their hearts, who followed a religion, but never knew to the Savior. The rapture has no denominational significance, it separates those who love Christ from those who only know his name, and it destroyed me inside, because I realized how often we concern ourselves with everything except the one thing that truly matters, and when heaven opens, who stayed? They stayed. There's no replay, no editing. I sat on the edge of the bed and wept. I wept for myself, I wept for my loved ones, I wept for all those who still don't believe, and I said a different prayer. God, if I can't wake up the whole world, let me at least wake up 3 people, 3, a mother, a friend, a neighbor, someone, because what I saw in that dream cannot be wasted. I can't keep this to myself. If you've heard this far, don't dismiss it, don't treat it like a fleeting emotion, don't just say, how beautiful, and go back to your routine. Why? When Jesus returns, the routine ends, time stands still, and only those who chose to remain in him remain. I am not a pastor, I am not a theologian, I'm not here to impress anyone, I am here because I saw it, because I lived it, because I was warned, and now, if you heard this, you heard it too. It's not about religion, it's about eternity, it's not about dogma, it's about salvation, it's not about theory, it's about heaven, and heaven showed me that there is still room. But it won't wait forever. You have been called today, right now. If something inside you burned when you heard this testimony, don't ignore it. This is the Holy Spirit knocking at the door, and when he knocks, it's because he is still knocking. If this message spoke to you, touched your heart, or awakened you in some way, I only ask one thing: share this video with 3 people, 3, not later, now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more warnings from heaven. Help spread what God is still trying to tell the world, that silence replaces opportunity, because when Lakilo say, Abridanvo, no fault are anadi.